Hello there. How do we write tests in Elixir? We have a built-in tool called ExUnit. You don't need to install any package for that. It's built-in. So how do we write our first test? We're going to go to the lib folder. Now this is just an example of how to do it the wrong way. Then I'm going to show you the correct way. We're going to create a new file called random_test.exs. Now this is very important. You need to type s as the end to tell Elixir that this is just a script and we do not want to compile this to production, right? We are just going to run this before we deploy to production. Now, follow me on this one, and later on I'm going to explain what's going on. You're going to type ExUnit.start at the top of the file, and then a test on Elixir needs to run inside a module. So we're going to define a module, def module. I'm going to call this random test. Okay. Inside here, you're going to type use ExUnit.case. Follow me on this one. I'm going to explain later. And then to write our first test, you can write test followed by the name, which is random test, followed by a do and end block. And here you can type assert true. This is the simplest form of test that you can write on Elixir. And to run this, all you have to do is go on your terminal, type Elixir, and then the path to your test. So mine is inside lib random test, and there you go. This is the most simple test that you can write. Now you might be thinking, okay, so every single time I write a test in Elixir, I'm gonna have to add ExUnit.start at the top and then manually find the path to the file. That is not very practical. Is there a better way? Yes, there is. So I just told you that ExUnit is built-in Elixir. And when we generated the tutorial project that we're working on, we generated a test folder. And the test folder is used by Mix. So we can use Mix to run the tests for us instead of just Elixir and the path name. And to run the tests by using Mix, all you need to do on the terminal is mix test. And what this does is it goes inside the test folder. It looks for a test_helper file. And then it runs this before the tests. And after running this file first, then it looks for all the other files that ends with _test and run them individually, okay? And Elixir generated this test for us. It's the simplest form of testing. It's running the tests for the tutorial module that was generated automatically. And if we run mix test, there we go. You can see here that we had 0 failures, 1 test, and also 1 doc test. Now, if I change this to anything else, like assert false, and then run that again, we should get a broken test. And there you go. We expected a truthy value, but we got false. Okay? All right. So let's start writing the tests for our users module so I can show you the syntax. We're going to close this. Inside the test folder, this is important, you're going to create a new file called users_test.exs. Oh, and before I forget, you don't need to write a test script on Elixir, which is different from JavaScript, because typically inside a JavaScript project, we have a test script that we define by hand. And on Elixir, you don't need to do this. If I open up TechSchool, for example, you can define a custom test script if you want to. So on TechSchool, it makes sense because I am running some database stuff before running the actual tests. But by default, you don't need to create this, okay? So no need to create a test script, right? Now we have the users_test. We no longer need to write ExUnit.start at the top because the test helpers are going to run before our tests. We can just type def module users test and then start writing our test. Now, the first line that we're going to write is use ExUnit dot case. And what is this? We haven't covered the use keyword in Elixir. And I haven't covered the use keyword on this crash course because it is related to meta programming, and I think this topic is too advanced for a crash course. But a TLDR of this keyword is that it's actually a macro. And whenever you see a use below a module, that means that some code is getting inserted here. So I'm going to give you one example. Going back to TechSchool, how does Elixir know that every page that I'm creating here is a live view, for example? Elixir knows because I am calling the use TechSchool web live view below every single live view. That's how it detects that I'm using live view. And then you can see the definition of the use here on another file, which is this one. So what's going on here is pretty much I am injecting this code inside my live view. That's it. So whenever you see a use on Elixir, that means that you're using a macro that is injecting code from somewhere else inside your module. Okay, just a quick short TLDR of macros. Okay, and here you can pass an optional parameter called async true. And what this does is it's going to run all your tests concurrently. Now the tests inside this file are going to run sequentially, but this test and then this other one are going to run concurrently if we also pass here the async true, okay? So this is good for performance. I'm going to add that. All right. Now, one fun thing before I move on is you might see here a funny looking function called doctest. So what is doctest? Well, if you go back to the generated module tutorial, you can see that it generated for us some documentation. We have documentation for the module, and we also have documentation for the function. And here we have an example of using the function, calling the function. And the documentation might be wrong. What if I go here and then change the result of the documentation to, I don't know, true, okay? The result of the hello function is world, and I'm saying inside the documentation that it's true. If I go back to the terminal and I write mix test, there you go. The doctest checked the Elixir code inside the documentation. So this is pretty neat, right? All right. But since I don't have any documentation inside the users module, let me just make sure I'm not saying anything wrong. We don't have any documentation here. So I am not going to write doctest, okay? Now let's write our first test. You can type test or describe if you want to have multiple tests. So here I can just say describe users module, okay? And then inside we can have individual tests. So I'm gonna say test. Which function are we going to test first? I think I'm going to check the new function, okay? So check test new and then arity 0, because I want to specifically test the new function with no parameters. So this is followed by a do, okay? And here you can type either assert to check for truthy values, or you can type refute if you want to check for falsy values. So if I say refute false, this should pass. Let me run the test again. Okay, this is passing. And as you can see, it ran 2 tests. So it's working. Nice. So let's create our first user. We can say default underscore user is equal to the users module dot new, right? And it's the new with no parameters, the new arity 0. Now you can type like the entire thing. For example, let me go back here. The generated default user is this one. You can literally copy the whole thing and say assert default user equals, and then the entire thing. This should work. Let me go back to the terminal. Mix test. Okay, this is working. Or you can check like an individual field. So you can say, for example, refute default user dot can drink, right? Because by default, if you don't pass an age, the user cannot drink. So I'm going to refute that. Let me go back in the terminal, mix test. There you go. This is working. Nice. And we can write this for every single function inside the users module. Let me grab another one. I'm going to create one for Daniel. So if we type new with the Daniel name, we get this back, right? So I'm going to say test. We are testing the new function with 2 parameters, right? So we're testing new arity 2 with the Daniel name, okay? Do, nice. We can say Daniel is equal to users dot new. We're gonna pass the name Daniel, and I think it's the first letter is uppercase, okay, followed by the age 26. Now this is Daniel, correct? If we go down below, I want to say that assert Daniel dot is cool is true. So we can write like this, or since is cool is already a Boolean value, you can just remove the equal true. Now let me just check if this is working. Okay, this is working. If I remove the equal true, this should also work. Okay. And just to make sure we're not going crazy, I'm going to actually write refute to see if if this test is not a false positive. Okay. We expected a false, but we got true. Nice. Now, before we finish this video, I wanted to mention 2 things: contexts and callbacks. And what is a context? It's a way of sharing information between tests. And by default, you have some metadata inside the context variable. So each test, you can name the test here, and then as the second parameter, you can pass a context, right? This context is available on every test. So if I do a simple io.inspect context, okay, here, let me open up the terminal, run mix test. There you go. The context is just a map with some metadata, okay? We have like if the test is async, the line, the module, the file, the case. So it's pretty useful. Okay, how about callbacks? What if I want to run something before all the tests or something before each test? You can use a callback. And to call a callback, all you need to do before your describe and test blocks, you can say setup to run something before each test or setup underscore all to run something before all the tests. And this is going to run only once for the entire module. Okay, so we have setup all do. Okay, and here you can do anything. You can like grab a user from the database, you can create a user, you can run a fixture to generate a user on the database, and then whatever you return here is going to be injected inside the context. Now, to be injected inside the context, you need to return either a map or a keyword list. So if inside setup all, we return a map with like user underscore name equal Daniel, right? Now, watch what happens with the context, okay? I'm going to run the tests again. And here we have everything from before plus the username, because that was injected by the setup all block that we defined here. And you can also return a keyword list. So you can do something like this: name equals Daniel, followed by is cool true. Whoops. Okay. And this is also going to be injected inside the context. So if I go back to the terminal, I run mix test, and then there you go. We have name, which is Daniel. We have is cool true. Nice. And one final thing is, okay, since the context is being passed before each test, and this is a variable, a map with a bunch of fields, you can do pattern matching here. So let's say that I only care about the name that is being passed. So you can do the following. You can remove the variable and then do some pattern matching. Like I am expecting a name field, and then I am binding that name field to the name variable. Or I don't know, I'm binding this to user underscore name. So if I do an io.inspect on user underscore name, and I run the test once again, there you go, we have Daniel. You can do pattern matching here. And once again, if you want to run this block before each test instead of before the entire module, all you need to do is setup instead of setup underscore all. Okay? And actually, I remembered one final thing. If you go into terminal and type mix test followed by dash cover, this is going to generate the coverage report for your project. So here, as you can see, the tutorial module is 100% tested. The users module is 30% tested. In total, we have 12% test coverage, and ideally we have 90. So yeah, we failed. And another thing that is very cool is it generates a cover folder with a summary of which lines of code were tested or not inside each module. So if I go here and I reveal the file in folder inside the cover, this is a simple HTML file, so I can just double click to see. So if I go to the tutorial module, you can see here that the only function is green. That means that it is being tested. If I go back to the Finder and I'm going to see the users. Now users, it's a bit more dramatic. we have a bunch of lines that were not tested and a bunch of green lines that were tested. And this is indeed true because I am testing the default user and I am also writing a test for Daniel, but everything else I haven't tested. So that's pretty much it, how to write tests in Elixir. I hope you enjoyed the video. I think it is very useful to have a built-in tool like this in Elixir. I wish JavaScript had something like this. But that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.